Good morning. Coming to you from a different spot today. I always have in the past recorded these from my office in Roncevert. The timing just seemed to work out better today to record it here at my office at Clifton, and who knows, that may be the case in the future. Thanks for your patience. Let's see how it goes. The passage today is Matthew 21, 33 to 46. If you have ever had to tell your children or your spouse the same thing twice to try and get the message through, you're going to love today's parable, or you're at least going to appreciate it, because the kids aren't listening and Jesus has to put his foot down. So I invite you to pause now, read Matthew 21, 33 to 46, and come on back with me. Now, just one quick note as we start, this is probably going to feel more like Bible study than it is a sermon, just because there's so much going on in this passage that we need to take time and look at. So this parable that you just read, Matthew 21, it's often called the parable of the wicked tenants, and it's a really difficult one to understand, especially all by itself. If you put it in the larger context of the book of Matthew, it helps it make a bit more sense, at least. What's going on here is Jesus is in conflict with the powers that be. And I know we have all kinds of ideas about what kind of conflicts existed between Jesus and people in power. So let's be very clear about what the conflict that's happening is. Jesus' main gripes were with the religious powers that be. The temple leaders, the Pharisees, whom Ron preached about last week in our joint service. Jesus was upset with the religious leaders because he didn't think they were that religious. After all, what he was often most upset about with them was their treatment of the least, the last, and the lost, as my friend Pastor Watts likes to say. The poor, the widows, the orphans, the sick. He thought that the powers that be allowed the Roman political powers of the day to exploit these people in order to keep their own positions of religious power. Now, oftentimes when Jesus was trying to make these points, with religious leaders in discussions, he would tell them a parable. He liked to teach telling parables. And if they didn't get it, he would tell them a second parable. He'd try and make the point once, they didn't get it, he'd tell them a parable, they still didn't get it, so he'd try and tell them a second parable. Trying to make the same point in a new way. And that's exactly what's happening in Matthew 21. He's in a heated discussion with religious leaders here. I think you are probably well aware of the story, but I doubt folks often remember that it happens right before today's story. You're probably well aware of the story where Jesus busts into the temple and turns over the tables of the money changers. That happens right before today's story. He's just finished busting into Jerusalem in the temple, turning over the tables of the money changers, and the religious leaders are livid with Jesus. So they say to him, "Who do you think you are? And who gave you the authority to do all this?" And so in response to that, Jesus tells them a parable. It's that parable that we read last week in church, parable of the two sons. They don't get it, so he tells them a second parable. And that's the one we've just read today from Matthew 21, 33 to 46, the parable of the wicked tenants. Now, it describes a situation which would have been very well known to everyone back in Jesus' day. Wealthy landowner builds a vineyard, all the bells and whistles, has a fence and a wine press, even a watchtower. It was business as usual. That sort of thing happened all the time. He leaves it in the hands of workers and goes back to his second or third home on the coast for the summer. The vineyard produces a profit. The tenants pass that profit along to the owner. They keep busy with their jobs. He keeps making money. It's all business as usual. This story is told all the time. Until one day, when the owner's people come to get their share, his share, and the tenants not only refuse to give him any, they attack him. And they even beat and kill one. So the owner sends more workers in to retrieve his rent. The tenants treat that group even worse than they treated the first one. So what's he going to do? Call the police? Send in his own private army? That probably would have made sense in the story and to the Pharisees who were hearing this parable, but instead the landowner sends in his only son, trusting the tenants who've been given responsibility as stewards over the land to treat his only son well, to turn from their evil ways and come back to their senses. If only that were the case. But the tenants kill his only son. And Jesus asked the religious leaders, when the owner of the vineyard comes, what's he going to do to those tenants? And they say, well, he'll put those miserable bums to death and find new tenants and get back to business. Because that's probably what they would have done. They see themselves in this parable as the landowner in charge of other people. Jesus says to them, the people who are in charge of the church, have you not ever read the scriptures? The stone that the builders rejected has become the cornerstone. In other words, Jesus is the only son sent by the landowner, and the religious leaders are the wicked tenants who kill him for a measly vineyard. This all began with those same religious leaders asking Jesus, do you remember what their questions were? Who do you think you are? And who gave you the authority to be teaching our people? And this parable is Jesus' answer. He's the only Son of God, sent to save the wicked people from themselves, even if they are too stubborn to realize it. It was at that time, when he got to the end of this second parable, that the kids finally got it. They realized what he was talking about. They realized that in this parable, they were the wicked tenants, ready to kill the only son of the vineyard owner, and they were beside themselves with rage. This is a cautionary tale. While we are not the Pharisees, while we are not the Sadducees, we are, like those in the parable, people entrusted by God with caring for the world around us. And sometimes we lose sight of that. Sometimes we come to feel entitled to the things that we think belong to us. Our church, our job, our reputation, our projects, our things. And we cling so tightly to those things which we think are only ours that we become our own cornerstone. This passage reminds us that the only cornerstone is Jesus. We like to make things really complicated. This is actually pretty simple. Our job's to lean on our cornerstone, to be part of his kingdom, to build our lives, build his kingdom around him. Who does he think he is? He's our cornerstone. And thanks be to God for it. Amen.